The morning mist clung to the jagged peaks of the Thornspire Mountains like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold on the ancient stone. Deep within a forgotten valley, where few mortals dared to venture, lay a sight that would have broken the hearts of those who remembered the old legends. Nethys, once the sovereign of these very peaks, lay curled upon a bed of moss-covered granite. His magnificent emerald scales dulled by years of earthbound existence. The dragon's breathing was slow and measured, each exhale sending small puffs of steam into the cool mountain air. His wings, once powerful enough to create windstorms with a single beat, now lay folded against his massive frame like broken sails. The membranes between the wing bones had grown thick and stiff, no longer the translucent green that had once caught sunlight like stained glass. Age spots dotted the once pristine scales, and his golden eyes, though still sharp with intelligence, held a depth of sorrow that spoke of decades of loss. Ned HYS had not always been thus. In the days when the world was younger and magic flowed more freely through the realm, he had been the undisputed master of the skies above the Thornspire range. His roar could shake avalanches from mountainsides, and his presence alone was enough to command respect from the lesser creatures of the high places. Dragons from distant lands would seek his counsel, and the few brave humans who caught glimpses of his aerial displays would speak of them in hushed, reverent tones for generations. But that was before the morning when he had attempted to take flight and found his wings responding sluggishly, carrying him barely above the tree line before betraying him entirely. The crash into the valley floor had been catastrophic, not just for his body but for his spirit. For a creature born to soar among the clouds, to be confined to the earth was a fate worse than death itself. The dragon stirred as a mountain. Breeze rustled through the pines that surrounded his resting place. With great effort, he lifted his massive head and gazed toward the sky, watching as a pair of golden eagles rode the thermals high above. How effortlessly they moved, how gracefully they danced with the wind. Once, he had been their superior in every way, but now he could only watch with envious eyes as they claimed the domain that had once been his. Birthright.net HYS lowered his head back to the stone, closing his eyes as memories flooded back unbidden. He remembered the sensation of breaking through cloud layers, the exhilaration of diving through mountain passes at breathtaking speeds, the simple joy of feeling the wind beneath his wings. Now those same wings felt like dead weight, useful only for providing shade or shelter from the rain. The isolation had been perhaps the cruelest aspect of his grounding. Other dragons had grown distant, unable to understand his condition, or unwilling to associate with one who had lost the fundamental ability that defined their kind. The woodland creatures that had once fled at his approach now barely acknowledged his presence, sensing perhaps that he was no longer the apex predator he had once been. Even the humans who occasionally ventured into the mountains seemed to pass by his valley without ever realizing that one of the ancient ones dwelt so close to their paths. In the early years of his confinement, Nethys had raged against his fate. He had tried repeatedly to force his wings to work, launching himself from cliff faces and rocky outcroppings in desperate attempts to reclaim his birthright. Each failure had been more devastating than the last, until finally he had given up entirely. The fire in his belly had dimmed to barely glowing embers, and the proud bearing that had once made him appear larger than life had given way to the posture of defeat as the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the valley walls in shades of gold and amber. Nethys found himself wondering, not for the first time, what had caused his wings to fail. There had been no injury, no battle wound or curse that he could identify. One day he had been soaring with the confidence of millennia, and the next, his wings had simply stopped responding properly. The dragon healers he had consulted in those early days had been baffled, offering no explanation beyond the vague suggestion that perhaps his time had simply come. But Nethys knew better. He could feel it in his bones, in the very core of his being, that this was not a natural failing. Something had been taken from him, some essential element that connected his will to his wings. Whether it was magic, confidence, or something else entirely, he could not say. All he knew was that without it, he was trapped in a prison of his own making. earthbound and forgotten. The sound of approaching footsteps broke through his melancholy reverie. Nethys raised his head alertly, his nostrils flaring as he caught an unfamiliar scent on the wind. Human, certainly, but not one of the usual travelers who occasionally pass through the lower reaches of the mountains. This one carried the smell of old books and dried herbs, of long nights spent in study and careful observation through the screen of pine boughs. Nethys caught sight of a figure making its way carefully along the valley floor. The human was young, perhaps 25 years of age, with dark hair tied back in a practical queue and wearing the sturdy leather and wool garments of a mountain traveler. But it was the way the human moved that caught the dragon's attention. There was a purposefulness to the steps, a sense that this was not merely a lost wanderer, but someone who had come to this remote place with specific intent. The human paused at the edge of the clearing where Nethys lay, and for a long moment, neither moved. Then slowly and deliberately, the young man stepped into the open space and spoke in a voice that carried both respect and wonder. "Great Nethys, ancient one of the Thornspire Peaks, I am Joran of the Lowland Academies. Come seeking you, drawn by the old stories and the whispers of the mountain folk. I know of your plight, mighty one, and I believe that your wings may yet carry you to the skies once more." The dragon's eyes widened in surprise. It had been so long since anyone had addressed him by name, let alone with the proper titles of respect. But more shocking still was the claim that his condition might not be permanent. For a moment, hope flickered in his ancient heart, like a candle flame in a draught. "You know nothing of my burden, young human," Nethys replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emerge from the very mountains themselves. "I have consulted with the wisest of my kind, and all have declared my case hopeless. What could a mortal possibly offer that dragons could not?" Joran smiled, and there was something in his expression that reminded Nethys of his own younger days, when the impossible had seemed merely improbable. "Perhaps, great one, it is precisely because I am mortal that I might see what others have missed. I have spent years studying the bond between mind and body, between will and action. I have seen warriors paralyzed by fear learn to fight again, and birds with broken wings take to the sky through patience and proper care." The dragon considered this, his great head tilting slightly as he studied the young human. There was something about Joran that inspired a cautious optimism, a sense that perhaps this unlikely visitor might indeed possess insights that had escaped his previous consultants. "And what would you ask of me in return for this assistance?" Nethys asked, his tone guarded but not hostile. "Nothing but the chance to learn from you, ancient one. Your wisdom and experience are beyond price, and I would consider myself honored to be allowed to attempt this restoration. If I fail, I ask only that you not hold it against me. If I succeed, then perhaps we might both gain something valuable from the experience." As the afternoon wore on, dragon and human spoke at length about the nature of flight, the connection between mind and wing, and the mysteries that had plagued Nethys for so many years. Joran listened with the intensity of a scholar and the compassion of a healer, asking questions that revealed a depth of understanding that surprised even the ancient dragon. For the first time in decades, Nethys felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. It was fragile and tentative, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through melting snow. But it was undeniably present. Perhaps, just perhaps, its long exile from the skies might finally be coming to an end, as the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks. Painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Nethys made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Very well, Joran of the Lowland Academies, I will accept your offer of assistance. But know this: I have been disappointed before, and my patience for false hope has worn thin. If you truly believe you can help me reclaim my wings, then you must be prepared for a long and difficult journey. The path back to the sky is not one that can be walked quickly or easily." Joran nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the commitment he was making. "I am prepared, great Nethys. Tomorrow we begin." As darkness fell over the valley, the dragon felt something stir within his chest that he had not experienced in far too long. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to soar once again among the clouds. To feel the wind beneath his wings and the limitless sky spread out before him like an infinite canvas of possibility. The first rays of dawn painted the Thornspire peaks in shades of rose and gold as Joran returned to the Dragon's Valley, his pack laden with scrolls, instruments, and carefully preserved herbs. He had spent the night in restless contemplation, reviewing everything he knew about dragon anatomy and the mysterious ailments that could afflict such ancient beings. More importantly, he had sent word through the mountain villages, seeking someone whose knowledge might complement his own scholarly understanding.net. Lay where Joran had left him the previous evening. Though the young scholar could tell the dragon had not slept well, the great creature's eyes were alert but weary, and there was a tension in his massive frame that spoke of old pain and newer anxiety. The hope that had flickered between them the night before now seemed fragile in the harsh light of morning, like a flame that might be extinguished by the slightest breeze. "You return," Nethys observed, his voice carrying a note of surprise that he tried to hide. "I confess, I wondered if you might reconsider your offer once you had time to reflect upon the magnitude of the task." Joran set down his pack and began unpacking his materials with methodical precision. "I gave you my word, Great One. But more than that, I spent the night reading accounts of similar cases. I believe I may have found references to a condition that matches your symptoms. There are treatments mentioned, though they require knowledge I do not possess alone." Before Nethys could respond, the sound of approaching voices echoed through the valley. Both dragon and human turned toward the entrance to the clearing, where two figures were making their way carefully along the rocky path. Joran rose and waved to them, relief evident on his face. "Kessa," he called out, "thank you for coming so quickly." The woman who entered the clearing was perhaps 60 years of age, her silver-streaked hair braided with small bones and dried flowers in the manner of the mountain folk. Her weathered hands and keen eyes spoke of decades spent gathering herbs in dangerous places and tending to ailments that lowland physicians would not even attempt to treat. Behind her walked a young girl of perhaps 12 years, clearly her apprentice, carrying bundles of freshly cut plants that filled the air with their earthy fragrances. Kessa approached the dragon without fear, though she maintained a respectful distance. Her gaze moved over Nethys with the practiced eye of a healer, noting the dullness of his scales, the stiffness in his wing joints, and the way he held himself like a creature in chronic pain. "So this is the great Nethys," she said, her voice carrying the musical accent of the high mountain clans. "Oh, I've heard the old songs about you, ancient one. My grandmother claimed to have seen you flying when she was but a child, your wings so green they made the forest jealous." Nethys studied the herbalist with curious interest. Unlike most humans, she showed no fear in his presence, only the professional assessment of one healer examining another's patient. "And what do your experienced eyes tell you about my condition, mountain woman?" Kessa circled the dragon slowly, occasionally stopping to examine particular areas more closely. Her apprentice, meanwhile, began unpacking the plant bundles and arranging them according to some system that only she and her mentor understood. "Your scales lack the inner fire that should make them gleam," Kessa observed. "Your breathing is shallow, as if drawing deep breaths causes discomfort. Most telling of all, your wings are held in a position that suggests chronic inflammation of the joints and connecting tissues." She paused, placing a weathered hand on her chin in thought. "Tell me, Great One, when did you last feel true joy?" The question caught both Joran and Nethys off guard. The dragon's eyes widened slightly, and for a long moment he did not respond. "Joy?" he finally repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. "I do not understand the relevance of such a question to my physical ailment." "Dragons are creatures of emotion as much as magic," Kessa explained, settling herself on a convenient boulder. "Your kind does not merely fly through physical means alone. The connection between wing and wind, between desire and lift, is as much spiritual as it is mechanical. When did you last feel the fire of happiness burning in your chest?" Nethys considered this carefully, his great head tilting as he searched his memories. "I cannot recall," he admitted finally. "Not since my wings began to fail me." "Perhaps not. For some time before that." Kessa nodded, as if this confirmed her suspicions. "Tala!" she called to her apprentice. "Bring me the starflower essence and the dried windgrass. We will begin with the simpler remedies first." Over the following days, an unusual routine developed in the hidden valley. Each morning, Joran would arrive with new exercises designed to strengthen the dragon's wing muscles and improve flexibility in his joints. The work was slow and often painful, requiring Nethys to stretch and move his wings in ways he had not attempted for years. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, range of motion began to improve. Kessa's approach was entirely different, but equally methodical. She prepared teas from mountain herbs that she claimed would reduce inflammation and restore the natural balance of energies within the dragon's body. More importantly, she spent hours simply talking with Nethys, drawing out stories of his past, glories and gradually helping him reconnect with the pride and joy he had once felt in flight. "You speak of your wings as if they have betrayed you," she observed on the fourth day, as she massaged aromatic oils into the joints where wing met shoulder. "But consider this. Perhaps they are simply waiting for you to remember why you wished to fly in the first place." "I flew because it was my nature," Nethys replied, though there was less certainty in his voice than there had been days earlier. "Dragons fly. It is what we do." "No," Kessa corrected gently. "You flew because it brought you joy. Because the wind called to you and the sky welcomed you home. Because in flight, you were most truly yourself." "When did you stop feeling that call?" As the days passed, Joran began to notice subtle changes in the dragon's demeanor. Nethys still could not fly, but he began to hold himself differently, with something approaching his former dignity. The exercises were becoming easier, and occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, the dragon would extend his wings fully and test their responsiveness to his mental commands. The breakthrough came during the second week of treatment. Joran was working with Nethys on a particularly challenging stretch when Kessa's young apprentice, Tala, accidentally knocked over a pot of boiling herb tea near the edge of the clearing. The girl cried out in alarm as the scalding liquid splashed toward her legs. Without thinking, Nethys lunged forward, his wings snapping open with a sound like thunder. For just an instant, he achieved actual lift, rising several feet off the ground as he interposed himself between the child and the falling pot, crashed back to earth immediately, but both the tea and the girl were safe. The silence that followed was profound. Tala stared up at the dragon with wide eyes full of gratitude, while Kessa nodded as if she had expected exactly this outcome. But it was Joran who spoke first, his voice filled with wonder. "You flew," he whispered. "For just a moment, you actually flew." Nethys looked down at his wings, which were still partially extended, trembling with the memory of that brief moment. "Of lift? I did not think," he said slowly. "I simply acted. The child was in danger, and I moved to protect her." "Exactly," Kessa said, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "You stopped thinking about flying and simply did what your heart commanded. That is the key, Ancient One. Flight is not a mechanical process to be analyzed and dissected. It is an expression of your deepest nature, your desire to protect and soar and be free." From that day forward, the dragon's progress accelerated dramatically. The physical exercises became easier as his muscles remembered their purpose, and the herbal treatments seemed to work more effectively as his spirits lifted. More importantly, Nethys began to remember who he had been before his grounding, not just the mechanics of flight, but the joy and purpose that had made it meaningful. Joran documented everything meticulously, understanding that he was witnessing something unprecedented in the annals of dragon healing. But beyond his scholarly interest, he found himself genuinely caring for the ancient creature, seeing past the fearsome exterior to the lonely, wounded being beneath. On the 20th day of their work together, as the sun set behind the mountain, peaks in a blaze of orange and purple, Nethys managed to achieve sustained flight for nearly a full minute. He rose from the valley floor with powerful wing beats, circled the clearing twice, and landed with only slightly more force than intended. The exhilaration on his face was unmistakable. For the first time in decades, the great dragon smiled, and when he did, his scales seemed to shimmer with their old inner fire. "Tomorrow," he announced, his voice ringing with renewed confidence, "tomorrow we attempt the high ledges. I feel the sky calling to me once again, and I am finally ready to answer. As Joran and Kessa packed their supplies for the night, both understood that they had witnessed something remarkable. Not just the healing of a dragon's wings, but the restoration of hope itself. The most difficult work still lay ahead, but for the first time since they had begun, true flight seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The morning of Nethys's first true flight attempt dawned clear and bright, with steady winds flowing up from the valley floor toward the high peaks. Joran had arrived before sunrise, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. After 3 weeks of careful preparation, the moment they had all been working toward was finally at hand. Kessa and Tala were already present. Having spent the night in the valley to ensure they would be available if anything went wrong, the herbalist had prepared a selection of restorative drafts and healing poultices, while her young apprentice had gathered armfuls of the softest mountain moss to cushion any potential crash landing. But it was the fourth figure in the clearing that surprised Joran most. Perched on a high rocky outcropping was another dragon, smaller than Nethys, but still magnificent. With scales that shimmered between blue and silver in the morning light, this newcomer watched the proceedings with keen intelligence, occasionally calling out in the ancient dragon tongue. "Was that?" Joran asked, gesturing toward the unknown dragon. Nethys followed his gaze, and his expression softened with an emotion that Joran had never seen before. "That is Valdris, my flight companion from the old days. I sent word to her when I began to believe that flight might truly be possible again. She has come to witness my return to the sky, and perhaps to remind me of what I once was." Valdris spread her wings and glided down to the valley floor with effortless grace, landing near the group with barely a sound. She was clearly younger than Nethys, probably no more than a few centuries old. But she carried herself with the dignity of dragon nobility. "Ancient One," she said, bowing her head respectfully to Nethys. "It gladdens my heart to see you preparing to reclaim your birthright. The skies have been diminished by your absence." Nethys returned her bow, and Joran could see tears gathering in the great dragon's golden eyes. "Your faith in me has never wavered, young Valdris, even when my own had died. Today I hope to prove worthy of that faith." The plan they had developed was ambitious, but carefully structured. Rather than attempting to fly directly from the valley floor, Nethys would climb to a series of increasingly high ledges on the valley wall. Testing his wings and building confidence at each level, the final launch point was a broad shelf of rock nearly 1,000 feet above the valley floor, high enough to provide plenty of time to recover if something went wrong, but not so high as to make a fall catastrophic. The climb to the first ledge was accomplished easily enough. Nethys's strength had returned sufficiently that he could scale the rocky walls with his old agility, his claws finding purchase in cracks and crevices that would have challenged even the most skilled human climber. At each stopping point, he extended his wings fully, testing their responsiveness and flexing the muscles that would soon be called upon to carry him through the air. "Remember," Kessa called up to him as he prepared for the first gliding attempt, "do not think about the mechanics. Trust your instincts and let your heart guide your wings." Nethys nodded, took a deep breath, and launched himself from the ledge. For a heart-stopping moment, he seemed to hang in the air, his wings spread, wide but not yet beating. Then, with a motion as natural as breathing, his wings caught the wind, and he glided smoothly across the valley, landing on the opposite wall with precision and grace. The cheer that went up from the watchers below was spontaneous and heartfelt. Even Valdris joined in, her melodic dragon voice adding a note of ancient celebration to the moment. "Well done, Ancient One," Joran called out. "How did it feel?" "Like coming home," Nethys replied, and the joy in his voice was unmistakable. The progression up the valley wall continued through the morning, with each glide becoming longer and more confident than the last. By midday, Nethys was incorporating powered flight into his glides, his wing beats strong and steady as he soared from ledge to ledge with increasing skill. But it was when he reached the highest launch point that the real test began. From this height, a true flight was not just possible, but necessary. There would be no gentle gliding to a safe landing. Either his wings would carry him as they once had, or the long fall would likely end his hopes of flight forever. Nethys stood on the broad stone shelf, looking out over the valley that had been his prison for so many years. The wind was perfect, flowing up the mountain slopes in steady currents that should provide excellent lift. Below, his friends watched, with held breath, while beside him on the ledge, Valdris waited to fly alongside him if he succeeded. "Are you ready, old friend?" Valdris asked gently. Nethys spread his wings to their full span, feeling the wind catch in the membranes and tug. At his frame, every muscle, every joint, every scale felt alive with possibility. The fear that had haunted him for decades was still present. But it was overwhelmed now by something far stronger, the absolute certainty that he belonged in the sky. "I am ready," he said, and without further hesitation, he leaped from the ledge. For one terrifying instant, he began to fall. Then his wings caught the air with a sensation like coming alive. And suddenly, he was not falling but soaring, rising on the mountain thermals with a grace and power that seemed to make a mockery. Of all the years he had spent grounded, Valdris launched herself beside him, and together they climbed toward the peaks, their wings beating in synchrony as they danced with the wind currents. Higher and higher they rose until the valley floor seemed impossibly far below and the snow-capped summits of the Thornspire range spread out around them like a frozen sea. The joy that filled Nethys was beyond description. This was what he had been born for, what he had been made to do. The wind beneath his wings was not just a physical force, but a connection to everything wild and free in the world. He was home at last. They flew for hours, ranging far across the mountain peaks and through valleys that Nethys had not seen from the air in decades. Valdris proved to be an excellent flight companion, matching his pace and skill with effortless grace while pointing out changes in the landscape that had occurred during his grounding. As the afternoon wore on, they eventually returned to the valley where their friends waited. Nethys landed with perfect precision on the valley floor, his legs absorbing the impact with practiced ease. The transformation in him was complete and unmistakable. Gone was the defeated, earthbound creature of just a month before. In his place stood a dragon in full command of his powers, his scales gleaming with renewed vitality and his eyes bright with purpose. Jorn approached him with wonder and not a little pride. "How do you feel, Great One?" "I feel as though I have awakened from a long dark dream," Nethys replied. "But more than that, I understand now what Kessa meant about remembering why I wished to fly. It was never about the power or the dominance. It was about the freedom, the connection to the wild spaces of the world, and the ability to protect those I care about." He looked around at the small group that had made his restoration possible. "You have given me back more than my wings. You have given me back my purpose, my joy, and my faith in the future. How can I ever repay such a gift?" To pack up her healing supplies, you repay it by using your restored gifts wisely, Ancient One. The world has need of dragons who remember what it means to protect rather than merely dominate. As the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Nethys felt a sense of completion that he had not experienced in longer than he cared to remember. His wings were whole again, his spirit restored, and his purpose clear. "Will you stay in the valley?" Jorn asked as he prepared to depart. Nethys looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "For a time, perhaps. But I think my wandering days are far from over. There are places I wish to see again, old friends I would like to visit, and new wonders I hope to discover. The sky is vast, and I have much lost time to make up for." Valdris, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "Would you welcome a flight companion on some of those journeys, Ancient One? The skies are more pleasant when shared with a friend." Nethys' smile was answer enough. As the group prepared to part ways, each carrying with them the memory of something truly extraordinary, Nethys took to the air one final time. He circled the valley slowly, his powerful wings carrying him effortlessly through the evening air, before climbing toward the stars with a song of pure joy echoing from his throat. The dragon had found his wings again, but more importantly, he had rediscovered the heart that made them worth having. In the years to come, the legends would speak of this restoration of the human healer who refused to accept defeat. the wise herbalist who understood that healing required more than medicine, and the ancient dragon who proved that it is never too late to reclaim what was lost. But those were stories for another day. Tonight, Nethys flew among the stars, free at last, his wings carrying him home to a sky that had waited patiently for his return.